I think we're going to be talking about why most conferences are not good. I don't know what that's the nicer way to put it, isn't it?
It really is.
Why most conferences suck. I don't know if that's a good title, but that's pretty much what we're going to be getting at, I think.
And it's, I guess, partially inspired, at least for me, from this article I wrote back in February. And the byline of this is, or not the byline, the subtitle of this, subheader? I don't know.
Man, I don't know what words are.
The descriptor of this is that it isn't that education conferences aren't needed, but I've heard this already workshops and marketing ploys are a waste of time and that we could spend our resources better elsewhere. So I made a graphic for us to fill out. It's titled, Why Conferences Probably Shouldn't Be the Way They Are Right Now, because even though some people like them and benefit from them, they're generally bad.
Okay.
So you and I already know a lot of the issues that there are with conferences as both being conference presenters and attenders and the people on the floor that, are in the showroom, etc. We also host our own yearly conference, which is a virtual conference, and we try to do that differently. So we understand this from both a lens of conference design as well as a conference attender. And what I figure we start with,
literally been on every side of this. We've seen this from every single angle.
We get it. We get why a lot of conferences run the way that they do. And I think our argument is like, then why have them at all? Like, what's the purpose of them? So I figure we can start off just by listing off maybe our top 7 things that we feel like are wrong. And then what we'll do is we'll view this at a variety of different popular conferences and make a lot of enemies along the way and never get invited back to a conference. How's that sound?
That sounds great. I don't plan on going anywhere anytime soon.
Should we narrow down our context of what we mean by conferences?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I think that might be important. What do we mean by conferences? Parent-teacher conferences? Are we talking about? Okay, let's talk ASCD.
ASCD is like the biggest one. Like, this is the conference.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Am I supposed to know who these people are, or are these just placeholders?
I think these are just random people.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, I don't recognize them.
We're just defining what a conference is. It really doesn't matter that we know who these 3 people are.
Well, it would if it's like, if they're trying to draw a big name into it. All right.
We're just describing what a conference is.
Let's learn more about
Pay no attention to the people that are on the screen. They're not relevant to this conversation.
He's going to have to make AI Nick in order to do the next episode. These have really evolved from like the actual sense of a conference, which would just be like-minded people hosting, sharing ideas. And I think it's really turned into these really big overdone shindigs that almost unanimously happen in big expensive cities. We've seen them hosted. Here's DC. My God, like you got to fly in to, Reagan Airport. You got to get a hotel in DC. You got to have transportation. It's a big expensive to do.
I think that in the context that we're talking about conferences, we're specifically talking about the big budget major education conferences, the ones that many people have been to or familiar with. So like South by Southwest, ISTE, ASCD, etc. These types of conferences.
Yeah.
We're not necessarily talking about like your regional small little conference that people get together at.
Yes.
Every single conference pretty much follows the exact same formula. You show up to one of these conferences. This is NCTE, right? Who's your keynote speaker? Jacqueline Woodson, but the main keynote speaker, the general session, the big draw is Tom Hanks, which in case you didn't know, he starred in over 40 films.
I love that they have a bio for Tom Hanks, as though somebody needs a bio there.
It's one of those things where it tends to be that the primary keynote speaker, the one that's making all the money from speaking, is someone who is tangentially related to education,
right?
But is more there as, again, like an all style, no substance figure. I genuinely do not believe an English teacher has anything to learn about pedagogy or even content from Tom Hanks.
Chris, we can also attest that a conference that we had attended earlier this year, one of the main keynotes was CNN pundit Van Jones. So speaking at an education conference as well. So
you have those types of keynotes. You also have other keynotes. I think that sadly, a lot of other keynotes do tend to get into that banal platitude vibe because it's really difficult to say anything of substance within a keynote address because you can't get into the weeds. But you also have to be careful that you don't offend anyone on a major stage. Most keynote speakers are not going to get one of the good keynotes I've seen, for example, was like Jesse Hagopian did a keynote. And I'll never forget this keynote because there was a portion in there. This is primarily a private school audience. He basically is calling out private schools for not admitting all the students and how public schools are the future, that kind of thing. And no one clapped. They clapped at everything else, but there was this like really awkward, you could hear like a needle drop. And then I clapped. So I felt really good about myself.
Insert jeb, please clap.
As a result, a lot of keynotes, because they want to get invited back, tend to not dive in deep. No, I don't know if Angus is like this. I just happen to have their picture up on the screen.
Yeah,
So,
don't slander Angus.
yeah,
Come on.
don't judge. I mean, they're not all like this. I'm saying it tends to be like that. So you have the keynote, but then the primary thing you do other than that is either the showroom floor or the workshops.
Right.
And I had brought this up in my article in terms of, I guess this is style or substance. Maybe we'll add one more really quick. Let's combine these two together in terms of talking about it. I think another one is that like it's always the same thing. This is from ASCD. This is from 2000, 23 years ago.
That's crazy.
If you feel old right now. Yeah.
That's crazy.
And let's just check out what they were doing 23 years ago. Here are the themes: differentiation, teaching the information generation, the science of learning, changing context of schools, helping all students achieve beyond class time, who's our teaching our kids, etc.
Wow. It seems like the more things change, the more they stay the same, I suppose.
So here is the 2024 ASCD conference. Sorry, I had to pull up 2023. 2024 doesn't have their things posted yet. Here are the topics: educators' roles, retention, educator capacity, personalized instruction,
differentiation,
using data, district-wide SEL, cultural competency, leading through change. I would say that 75% of this is the same. Personalized instruction, using data, and even though they aren't using the terms like equitable learning and cultural competency in this, that's what like helping all students achieve means, and like who is teaching our children is in regards to having a more diverse teaching profession. So like it's mostly the same stuff. On the one hand, having foundational content and concepts are important in education. It's important that we have a collective understanding of the basics. But I think that 99.9% of workshops are just the basics.
I'm thinking in my head here, both as we go through those lists and then as we, generate our own list here, I wonder if there's a comparison that we can draw between these big national conferences that we're talking about and like AAA game studios. Because I think a lot of the same concerns would kind of overlap there, right? They're so invested in kind of the next big thing, and they have to draw so much spectacle. They have to draw so much attention in the form of spectacle to sort of make up their money because, right, it's this big, expensive kind of operation that you can't take risks in the same way, a small indie studio might.
I think that Ubisoft is probably the best example because Ubisoft games, this is gonna, I think, fracture the audience a little bit if you don't play games. So, but I mean, Ubisoft games are all the same, right? There is a Ubisoft style game. You go up towers, you find things. It's true across Far Cry, Assassin's Creed. Go through open world environments, you find the lookout towers, you complete the objectives, you move on, and they're usually very well produced.
Right.
I think that they are the epitome of all style, no substance. I can't stand those games. They're so boring.
Yeah. So like ASCD could be like their annual conference could be like the newest Assassin's Creed or the newest Call of Duty, right? It's like, okay, we have to make so much money on this thing. Like that's the starting point is they're going to make or break our next year or two with this sale. We can't deviate from a formula that we know kind of works, but we have to slap a new layer of textures. We kind of have to situate it in sort of a new world. So in this case, maybe with I'll just shift over to NCTE because we know who the speakers are. But like, we can't have the same people, or we can't have people that nobody knows, and we can't have people that are sort of the rebels and the subversives in their field, because they're
Or
going to
dry.
yeah,
Yeah.
they're going to challenge people and make them feel uncomfortable when they've spent. We want to make them happy, right? We want to make them feel good. So we're not going to bring things that are going to be particularly challenging. They're mostly going to reiterate and hit on the same kinds of formulas.
To add on to that analogy, it is also very similar. You're talking about the bloat of this. Uh,
Yeah, that's the word for it.
because you have to keep churning out a conference every single year that attracts all of these different people, the themes aren't going to change, because if you also were to change the themes, the workshop style, you might alienate a portion of your audience. This will be the last thing we do with the video game analogy. People who tend to play AAA games, if you introduce to them an indie game, so like you send them to a conference that's not like this, their reaction's going to be like, well, where's all the cool visuals? Where's all the style? Where's all, like, why am I not being treated as well? I
Yeah,
mean, you've probably been to a more hole in the wall conference where you might not get lunch for free. There might not be enough coffee. I mean, I've been to plenty of conferences that are just like at someone's school. Like we would all
yeah.
meet together and just go to a school and talk. And those tended to be so much better because they were rooted in real pedagogy. Like these were actual teachers doing real work. It was a lot less polished, but also a lot more meaningful.
I think what is also just interesting on the note of coming back to the conferences is just the way that they do sort of elevate these edu celebrities and sort of rock stars, if they're not picking them from outside of education, for the headliners. It's a reward for excellence in your field, right? To be on this stage, for all of that. But at the same time, too, the most powerful learning experience that I ever had was at a teacher was not at a conference like this. It was, even in interdistrict PD, where you get to learn from other teachers from across your district or across the building. It's where I get to go to another school and I get to see how another school functions in the course of their day and watch how other teachers teach.
The tricky part of navigating this is because you were talking about how a lot of people see this as like a reward,
Yeah,
is that because of how dehumanizing the teaching profession is, it kind of does serve as a reward. So taking away these conferences and us like saying, like critiquing it and saying like conferences are bad and a waste of time, I don't want that to come across as like, I get that. Like when I was a teacher, I went to Deeper Learning in San Diego. The school paid for it, and it was sick. Like I loved it. You get to go to San Diego. I've never been there before.
yeah,
All your meals are paid for. It's like top of the line. You got the open bar. These conferences, as I have on the screen here, even advertise that. Like it's a big part
yeah.
of it. You can, if you're in Washington D.C., you can check out the museums. You go to the National Mall, etc. The travel is a pretty quintessential part. You're being treated for the job that you're doing. And typically the teachers that are selected to go to these things are the teachers who maybe, well, they're at the margins. They're either the teachers that are, your rock star teachers that you want to keep around, or they're your teachers who are your like problem teachers who are trying to be fixed by going to the conference.
Yeah.
So let's then dive into, let's talk about money for a second. Which we talk about this a lot because we're a small nonprofit organization. Speaking of which, if you want to support us and the work that we do, which is all for free, you should donate, because it's expensive. Like it is extremely expensive as the attendee or as the presenter.
Right.
As folks may or may not know, pretty much every conference that you go to and that you present at, you rarely are going to get paid. Some conferences will offer you a discount at like a 50% discount or like a 20% discount. HRP has presented at 5 or 6 conferences in the last year, and I'm pretty sure we've only gotten a discount to one
Right.
ever. And that discount was a result of like a personal conversation we had with one of the organizers.
Right.
So like it's not common. Typically you're paying a full price ticket plus your travel to go to these conferences. Again, unless they're like really small. We've been invited to small conferences before. That's just like, let's get you out there. And that's
Yes.
cool.
Definitely not all conferences. Let's be
Right.
very clear.
These types of conferences that we're talking about.
You will pay to go to South by Southwest and present. To add value to their organization and to their conference, you are going to have to pay them a lot of money to do that, because you're essentially paying for the platform, right? They're treating this as, well, we're running a platform for you to do this work, not hey, if all of us stopped coming, we wouldn't have a conference to go to, right? You're going to have to pay to even get in that room in the first place.
So let's just calculate this out and see how much it would cost for you and I to attend South by Southwest.
Right.
So South by Southwest is next year, March 4th to the 7th. It's $595 a person.
Stupid.
So
are you going to dox me here? Let's go.
I mean, we know what city you live in.
No.
So you're going to Des Moines. You're to take the flight from your house. It's in Austin, right?
Correct.
It's always in Austin. Yes. Okay, so we're going from Des Moines to Austin. We'll just do you for right now. Even though it's super cheap if we were to come back on the 7th. Look at that. Allegiants have to be like one of like those ones where it's like
I didn't even care. 2.5 hour direct flight. Sign me up.
No, but you're gonna end up paying the fees, is what I'm saying, dude. These are the ones that like
who cares?
Allegiant extra price bag. I just don't want anyone to think that like we're yeah. There you go. A bag. A bag is $20 to $45 a bag. So like, yeah, it's cheap, but like you're gonna still end up paying this price right here. Let's just say it's $300 for the flight.
Okay.
We'll take it down a little bit. All right. Hotel availability tool. Okay, there we go. The Hilton in Austin. It's jeez, you could go all the way up to $1,000.
What?
Jesus. I'm assuming this is per night.
Yeah.
5 nights. So that's 5 times. Where'd that go? Oh my goodness. I have so many tabs open.
Let's do like 300.
Let's just say it's like $75 for an Uber. Plus we got to pay for food.
Yep.
Nick, you're a bigger guy. You're tall.
Hey,
you got to eat. You got to eat calories. You are tall. So $50 a day for 6 days. And if we let's not calculate this in, but keep in mind too, usually these happen during the school year. Almost all of these happen during the school year. So you'd also pay for the sub if you're a school, which is about what, $150 a day, depending on where you're at.
Let's just leave that out, but let's just assume.
Okay, so that is 2,000. Oh, we already got the ticket. Okay. So it'd be $2,770. This also doesn't include any add-ons because I bet the conference also has like paid for workshops and stuff.
Sure.
So nearing $3,000 a person. That's just for you. We haven't calculated for me yet.
Yeah.
So if we were both to go, I mean, we could split some of those hotel costs and stuff, but you're still looking at like $4,000, $5,000, $6,000.
What I think is really egregious here, right, is then you think about the people who are able to be in the space with you, or the people who are able to send representatives either from schools or from, say, the nonprofit world as opposed to the for-profit world, who don't come from big companies, who don't come from these backgrounds, right? That's cost prohibitive for us. So, there's a perspective and there's a set of ideas coming from progressive education as we do that aren't represented in that space. Unless the case is like we are then turning around and selling something, right? Unless we run the calculations and say, hey, we think we can make $10,000 from our, which again, I don't know how that's the case because we're not like selling a product, right? So it necessarily limits the work that we're able to do.
Yeah, we also didn't calculate in childcare.
Yeah, my kids got to go to like before and after school care, right? Like my dog's got to go to doggy daycare instead of being at home.
Plus, like a lot of teachers do work multiple jobs, and you can't work those jobs if you're away, especially on like the weekend, because you're going to be traveling on the weekend.
Right.
So there's something that I want to pull out of what you just said, which is part of the reason why it's all style and no substance, and they kind of are the same thing, is that they also encourage the speakers or workshop presenters to then sell the things that they're doing, which makes a lot of workshops feel, and I felt this way, like full disclosure, as a nonprofit organization, it feels very timeshare-y. Yes. Because you're getting a group of people in a room for an hour or two to talk about a topic. But at the end of the day, your goal, if you're spending $3,000, $6,000, $9,000 for a group of people to go out there, is to get people to buy your product or to donate to you, or whatever that might be. So it's not uncommon to go into a workshop and have someone say like, hey, you should buy my book, or hey, you should visit our website and purchase one of our courses. And it can feel like I'm not getting all the information because that's not the goal. The goal is to sell. Unlike those conferences you were mentioning earlier, where they're more just like gatherings and people are just there to share stuff. They don't have anything to sell.
It feels less bad to pay for these things at a smaller rate if I knew that the presenters were being compensated for time, being compensated for travel, being compensated for their labor, I would be fine paying. I'm not saying don't pay or don't have paid conferences, but it's the idea of like, where does that $600 go? Like, if it's not going to the teacher leaders or the workshop leaders or the instructors, like if there's just a board of directors somewhere or the CEO of South by Southwest, like I just don't know who's getting paid if not the labor of the people who are actually putting on workshops and contributing to the product that is South by Southwest. So that's the crappy thing, is it's essentially asking not just for volunteer labor, but like a paid internship.
And it's worth noting just how much money we're talking about here. That, I mean, we've always been huge proponents of the idea that conferences should always pay speakers. And I'm coming at this with a little bit of aggression because we don't get paid to speak at a lot of conferences. And I find that very frustrating because we are a really small nonprofit that does pay our speakers at our conference. For example, NCTE, I'm only using them as an example because I know this because we're about to present there. But NCTE back in 2022, which is the most recent information I could find, claims to have 8,000 attendees. All right. If even, let's say that for some reason, 7,000 of those attendees are actually paying, even though they're not comping their presenters, but maybe like 1,000 of those tickets are given out on scholarship, right?
Right.
Well, you would take $7,000 or 7,000 people, multiply that by NCTE is, I believe, $500. For members, $325. For non-members, $435. Let's just say it's $400 to do like a really quick average. That is $2.8 million.
If I think the money's going to what? Tom Hanks or say the top 3 keynote speakers or something who, if you go online and try to find the speaker fees for some of these top tier speakers, we're talking like five digits, at least, $30,000.
We've asked keynotes that are $30,000, $50,000, $75,000 for an hour.
Easily. Yeah. And that's not even including travel and all the other things if you were getting it in person.
Right. It feels like very outdated practice that a lot of employers used to have. I remember, well, it's still going on right now, but like on LinkedIn and stuff, a lot of people used to do interviews where you have to do work for the company. So like you have to do like a practice code or prepare a lesson plan or do some kind of work for the organization to prove that you know how to do it. And there's been an ethical shift in the last 5 or 10 years to pay people for doing the interview. This model of not paying presenters and just doing work for exposure feels very outdated.
Yeah.
Another example that comes to mind is a lot of online publications used to not pay writers for submitting work, and you would submit that work for exposure. So they would go buy your book, etc.
Yes.
That practice is changing quite rapidly. Organizations like ours, among many, even though we can't pay a lot, pay something. So at least you're getting something out of that work that you're contributing.
And real quickly, it was interesting. Well, last summer we actually published an article from 2 academics who now have actual published papers through the peer review process, right? But they published on our website, kind of a preview of the work in progress that they were working on, post a pre-publication. And when we paid them for writing that article for our website, they said, this is the first time we've ever actually gotten paid for doing this work.
So let's do another one here. And there's something that you alluded to earlier, which is like not everyone can easily attend. It's not that everyone has to be able to attend in person. It's that why is there not a good virtual option given all the tools that we have? And how could that serve as a way to potentially lower price points for people that can't afford to travel or can't travel, just period, because of some kind of disability? Maybe you're sick, maybe you just don't like flying. Like there's a bunch of different reasons, right? You don't have time to fly, you can't get childcare, whatever it might be.
Well, the virtual option is like a second tier option. It's not centered in the mind of the presenters. It's, because if you're if you're attending virtually an in-person conference, you're invisible. You have no way of interacting with the presenters or the other attendees. Like it's like watching a YouTube video, right? Like I don't get to interact with my favorite YouTubers because I watched, the YouTube video that they uploaded.
Well, even then they might respond to a comment.
God,
or something,
I was just going to say, even that's a bad analogy, right? You probably have more interaction with your average, YouTuber. The reason why people then associate really they associate virtual conferences as being like, well, that's not worth my time, or like that's boring or bad or whatever, is because exactly what you said, right? It's a camera put it in a room. So when you think virtual conference, that's the experience that you immediately associate with it. This negative, again, second tier kind of option where you're just like, well, I'll just watch the video recordings later or whatever, you know?
To be clear, getting together with like-minded people and being in person, that's a super powerful experience and something that we should do. But we don't need to put 8,000 people in the same spot to do that and charge them thousands upon thousands of dollars. You could do
Right.
that with a road trip, and we could organize those things and make that work in a
Right.
much more healthy way.
Since we led with the virtual, you know, we're virtual only, right? We're virtual first. We lean into all the affordances that and technologies like Discord, even Zoom, and you know the flipped keynote models, all the things that we lean into. But then not having to travel actually lets us interact with a wider range of people than we normally would anyway. We were able to comp tickets for two students in who from South America. They were able to attend and contribute in huge, massive ways that normally they wouldn't be, because we can't afford to comp also their travel, right? Or and they can't afford to do it either because right they're students. They'd have to get visas, they'd have to get travel, they'd have to do all these things, right? We had North and South America. That included Canada, right, and several countries across, across North and South America. Jesus, what are you laughing at? From
North and
Japan,
South America, which included Canada. It's just a very funny phrasing.
it is
Like, whoa,
okay. Leave it in
yeah.
there. Japan, Australia, Europe. It really was an exceptional group of people to be able to be in the same room with.
Who is included as a result of doing conferences online allows more people to be at the table, not just from a geographic standpoint, but when we do our demographics for our own conference, the majority of people are 18 to 24. Like they're young people because it would be far too expensive to travel, nor realistic to give up that amount of time to do that. And it's also something that's just more tangible for people who are younger. Like you and I aren't super young, but like I like going on the internet and talking with people and typing and playing games and doing that kind of thing. That's what
Yeah,
I've grown up with.
yeah,
Going to an 8,000 person conference and sitting in rows and listening to Tom Hanks talk sounds really boring. And,
yeah.
I'm probably going to skip it. Like, I don't care.
This is true. Yeah. So then the other part too is the accessibility part is also a huge hurdle for people with disabilities, because one thing that I was not aware of before it was shared with me is that for people with mobility aids, a lot of those get trashed by airlines, either
Yeah. Yeah.
in shipping and other things too. So it can actually be tremendously costly and risky for people who use mobility aids to actually engage in travel.
It's
Yeah,
it's also safer because we also consider like we're in a COVID context as well.
yeah,
Like I don't personally really like attending conferences where there's thousands upon thousands of people in the same room,
yeah.
especially in like the current COVID context. It makes me nervous. I do it, and I live in that cognitive dissonance. But there's many folks who are immunocompromised that just can't take that risk.
Right. So if we go to these education conferences and look around the room and we don't see, right, disabled people in there, then we end up making decisions and telling stories and having with about education and the context, the content, et cetera, without those people and those voices in the room.
So then let's go on to the next one, which is something that we bring up in our own conference a lot, is the environmental impact.
Yeah.
And I feel like I'm opening up all of these with a disclaimer, but like I recognize this in the context of you and I are quite literally at the time this video is being published in Poland talking at a conference that we flew out to.
That's true.
So
We are
like
hypocrites first and foremost.
yes, we are hypocrites. But to be fair, the idea of flying 8,000 people to a location, and it's worth noting too, the conference that we're going to is a little different in the sense that we are the only two people from the United States, I'm pretty sure, at this entire conference. So
Very local.
save your email.
Most people are not flying across the Atlantic
most people
Ocean
are
to
not
attend
flying
it.
it. It's a Polish-based conference.
Yeah.
Regardless, like especially in the United States where we don't have access to like trains or other ways of easily getting around the vast lands that we've conquered. the environmental impact of both getting people there, so flying from all different parts of the country or perhaps world, but then the impact that people leave when they're there, right? We know this from musical venues specifically, the toll of people like just hanging out, partying. I mean, a lot of people go out after the conferences, right? They go to bars, etc. You litter, you make a mess, you pollute. The impact of you being there is quite costly.
I do recall seeing very recently there was a conference for like the American Sociological Association or Psychological Association, one of those two things. And they recently released a statement that regarding their conference and environmental sustainability. Were you able to pull it up there?
Well, this is something different. This is the Theaters Trust website, which is in the
Oh,
UK.
cool. Oh,
This is
cool.
from 2022, but in this case, they have if a speaker has to fly, they pay to the offset of carbon for flights. They're completely digital. Something that I didn't even consider is like when you do the show floor and you walk around and talk to people, the amount of waste, like all the printed pamphlets, all the little stickers and random junk that you get that you never use again that you leave in your conference bag.
Say a plug here for, again, for us, like when we go to conferences, we do like you see the swag and the little trinkets, the little garbage, plastic garbage that all the other companies have, and I feel like like we're cheaping out and stuff because it's not necessarily that we don't want to have those things, but we just know we don't want to contribute to to that space. We don't want to contribute to more junk in the wastebasket or more microplastics in the ocean. So we don't have the same kind of level of swag, for better or worse.
I think if one thing probably should be removed from conferences, it's probably the showroom floor. I genuinely think those things are pointless.
Yeah,
Sorry to all of the ed tech companies. I guess we're kind of part of the problem because we presented those, but man, it's
yeah,
just
not a good use of time
not a good use
for
of time.
anybody involved.
Also just like the amount of waste. Like, let's find a different way to get people in front of schools. That's not that. What's our seventh?
Okay, we've got all style, no substance. It's always the same thing. It's expensive.
We didn't really talk. I mean, we said no substance. Part of it is too like the the learning model is horrible. Like that's the last one. Like think about how they're set up. They are set up in the most traditional, boring way to learn that is not how people engage. I can't handle it. Like whenever I'm at those conferences and you're sitting there for 2, 3, 4, 5 hours and someone's just talking at you. And
Yeah,
again, because it's about like encouraging selling and because you have to make your impact, it tends to be that most workshop presentations are not interactive.
it's so funny. We've replicated the worst parts of school that our students complain about for adults. Long time of sit and get, largely kind of irrelevant or boring. Sessions where people talk at you. And you're stuck to the pace of the clock, right? You're kind of waiting for the day to end so you can go do the fun stuff. So you can go to dinner, you can go to the bar, you can see what people are doing after the conference.
Speaking of, how do we break that model? Let's spend like 5 minutes on this, 5, 10 minutes
Yeah.
on what do you do differently? I think there's two different ways to view this. And we've kind of spoken at length in between here about how we do virtual conferencing and flip keynotes and all that kind of stuff. But you can make virtual conferences more interesting by designing flip keynotes, offering transcripts, giving people asynchronous ways to engage. A virtual conference is more than possible. But I think it's equally interesting to talk about, okay, in-person time together is valuable. What could that look like? And I've written about this, Nick, but do you have like any thoughts about how we would redesign an in-person conference to avoid these problems?
So redesign an in-person conference.
Right, because like it's valuable to be in person. I don't think the future of conferences should be all online.
Oh, that's interesting. I'm all in, man. If I don't have to go to another in-person conference, I'm good.
See,
But
that's ironic because like I feel like I'm the more introverted one, but I do think there's value in being around other people.
that's true. Well, I guess I mean I love going and talking with people and doing dinners and just doing all that stuff. But I don't like the formality of it. It's like I just wish there was a more informal way to bring people together. So I would just suggest instead of these big national things or even regional things, right? Like, let's just really like break them up into smaller local gatherings that are locally organized.
Sure. The more local, the better. And speaking from experience, as someone who had to basically plan a in-person conference, the
Very
the
true.
nice places are really not that expensive. If you go to like maybe a second tier university, right? Like not the big one that everyone knows, but like the one that's like the smaller school, it's like $8,000 for 3 days, which is
Right.
a lot of money. But if you're charging $200 a ticket and it's local and you're not paying for travel, et cetera, I think that's pretty fair. You're going
Right.
to recoup that quite quickly, and
Right.
be able to take care of people and still have a pretty nice venue. You could also just host it at a school. A lot of
Totally.
conferences are hosted at bigger schools, and you can make that work.
Yeah.
And it
I
has the
love
added benefit that
I wasn't able to do this just given my schedule, but teacher powered schools, they actually do school site visits, which is awesome.
right.
So you can actually just go and see and hear and learn. And again, I think teacher powered schools is another like great example of that in-person conference model done well. Like the best breakout sessions I've attended were in that space. Even like the quote unquote keynotes were all just like table work. Like you would be doing work with the group at a table, having the conversations. And
I do want to end on this because it's something that I brought up in that article that I was referencing before. We need to evolve the conference formula more generally. It's not that like teacher powered schools is a great conference, but I think we could go even further, including for ourselves.
yeah,
And it's something that we've wanted to experiment with, but to be honest, like we don't have it. Ironically, going back to like that AAA argument of like why you can't experiment. Well, even as like an indie or like double A organization, we can't afford to experiment at this level because if we couldn't pay our speakers, we would bankrupt ourselves. Our conference is revenue neutral. We don't make any money from it. Literally, all the money goes to the speakers. I had written in this article about unconferences or ed camps. I don't know if you've ever been to one of those. I like those a lot. I mean, that's basically what you're describing. The
oh, okay,
idea of having like a local gathering of people that's a lot less formal, where you come together and just talk about school stuff. That's an ed camp. I think we should do that, except with a little added twist. I think it would be fascinating to have a new form of conferencing where it's locally organized, and there are some places that already do this, but not so much in education. So you have something that's locally organized where you reach out to a variety of different fields. So like you reach out to community planners, to documentary producers, to board game people, to graphic designers, to teachers, and you bring them all together to have conversations around a specific theme. So we're not educators learning from educators. We're
ah,
educators learning from educators as well as people who are in a completely different field than us
yes,
because there's so much there. So I had written on here like, how do documentarians tell stories?
that's
That
cool.
would be such a fascinating thing to learn. Or how do board game creators design games that keep people at the table? And then me as an educator can come in as like, oh, like that makes me think about the class, or how do I keep kids engaged? Or how in
Right,
English class, maybe I help like tell stories. That's semiotic domains. It's our ability to learn more by talking to people in related fields as opposed to hitting the point of diminishing returns where we're just kind of preaching to the choir. Sometimes when we
yeah,
go into spaces with a lot of progressive educators and we're saying things, 30 out of the 60 minutes doesn't really feel like there's a purpose because we're explaining why we do the things that we do, but everyone
right.
else in the room already agrees with us. In this space, I have zero idea how the design of sidewalks or green spaces in a community changes the way people interact. Something I wrote on
Mm.
here, but a community planner certainly does. Like that's what they do. And by learning that, I might design schools differently and take something away from that.
When the stakes are lower, in the sense that there's not so much financial overhead for organizers, the ticket prices are lower, so there's less of a feeling like I have to recoup, my thousands of dollars. You're not investing so much in terms of time and travel and everything else. Then you really get a more authentic product, don't you? You get a more authentic conversation at the end of that. Just like again, to draw upon that indie or A or double A kind of game ethos, they can put more of their own character and their own, niche kind of quirkiness in there because the stakes are so much lower. They don't have to sell $30 million worth of something to break even on a project that took them, 2 years to design. They can really just kind of take it slower and put heart into it, knowing they're going to be hitting a niche audience.
I mean, at the end of the day, ultimately, I would rather have smaller, more niche communities that were purposeful and authentic and maybe a little less overdone, a little bit more rough around the edges, that have these big, grandiose events where ultimately they mean nothing.
Hey, thanks for watching. Remember to like, share, and subscribe. Head to our website and check out our conference resources. They're all there, available for free as a result of our attendees and our donors and our sponsors. Thanks for watching. Take care.